Now, what do I mean by that? When I say methadone hydrochloride, in terms of this acidic language that I'm referring to and the poor binding process of iodine, I'm basically talking about a form of mathematics. So when we talk about language, we have to consider mathematics, we have to consider the helixography, the DNA and RNA of language, or the genetics of language, and a whole host of other things. But as I said, so when we're talking about mathematics, we're talking about methodology. And so math is meth. Okay, so as a matter of fact, which is the abbreviation or slang for, again, methadone. So we're talking about a corrupt form of mathematics that has been imposed or superimposed on our people. Now, I know this may sound kind of strange to some extent, because it's like, okay, you started out with Atlantis, and you said that it has some relation or correlation to the United States, and the United States Corporation, and it does. But all of these things have to be considered, as I said, in terms of cause and effect, to see exactly how this played into the dynamic of the Moorish Empire, the ebb and flow of the Moorish Empire from Anatolia to the Crimea, all the way back to the Americas, Latinum, known as Moorish Spain, and other parts of the Moorish Empire. In fact, not to get away from the methadone effect, is that, so we're talking about a corruption of language, and we're talking about a corruption of language, we're talking about something which is foreign and therefore barbaric, because barbaric or barbarian means foreign. And so when we understand it from that particular perspective, then we're looking at those who are on a day-to-day basis, meaning the Albion male, of whom again is imposing the acidic electrical or electrically charged dialect upon our people, are daily seeking convictions via their court system. And so when you look at the fact that they're constantly seeking convictions of our people, conviction is actually dealing with what? Language as well, because when you say something, you say it with conviction, as in the case of someone being convicted by a jury of their so-called peers. They're actually saying it with what? Conviction, and in addition to which is a form of damnation. So they're actually looking to convict you for eternal damnation in the Cretan system. And so this is what has played an integral part or integral role in, again, the dynamic of the Moorish Empire, particularly in and throughout the United States. So now, when we look at the beginnings of the Moorish corporate family trust, known as the United States, or more commonly known as the United States, it's important to understand that it was not originally known as the United States in 1774. That is what has become a common appellative. But if you do any research and you look at the Annales Continens, the Annales Continens is the Continental Records, which prior to that was known as the Annales Imperium, which was the Imperial Records. And now in the Imperial Records, you have what is known as the Consociumus Regnum. The Consociumus Regnum was a consolidation or a convocation of 13 royal families. Those royal families were Moorish families that basically consolidated their power for a number of reasons, of which I'll go into, in forming this corporate family trust, again, as I said, that we call the United States Corporation. And they did this under what was known as the Capitis Diminutio, known to you as the Articles of Association, and 3 years later the Capitis Diminutio, known as the Articles of Confederation. However, as you can see from the names that I'm giving, or the terminology that's being used, is that these documents were not originally in English. Many of them were in the ancient Moorish Latin language. Again, as I said, if you do any extensive research, if you look in, there are particular sections in the Library of Congress, as well as the Department of State Library, of which only very few people have access to, that will give you more information on the early years of the forming of the United States Corporation. At any rate, as I said, it was essentially or loosely termed Consequimus Regnum, which basically was an act. It was not a name per se that was used for the United States, because when you say Consequimus Regnum, Consequimus basically means that we have united, meaning that we have done something, or a group of us have done something, meaning we nobles or we membrana of this particular thing that we have formed, or these United Kingdoms. And so Consequimus Regnum was the consolidation or convocation of these 13 kingdoms. But what has happened with the whole United States aspect is that they've been using an indicative verbal action in the noun sense, or nonsense, if you will. Meaning that when they say the United States, obviously they're using a definite article, the, and so therefore using it in the noun sense. But when you say anything, even according to the rules of English, and you add an ed, like I walked to the store, obviously that indicates that you've done something as in a verbal action. And therefore cannot be used as a name or, again, in the noun sense. So these particular 13 kingdoms, later misnamed colonies and states, had rulers known as Bais, Baigs, or Beglabegs. These Bey titles were titles that were also used by the first ruler of China, known as Qinbai, and of course also used in the Ottoman, the Moorish Ottoman Empire, more commonly known as the Ottoman Empire, the Bai or Bey title. But anyway, these Beys or Bey rulers on the continent in the 1760s and 70s were kings, princes, and governors owing allegiance to the Sultan at that time, Sayyid ibn Abdullah Muhammad XVII, who ruled between 1757 and 1790 from Marrakesh. Now Marrakesh at that time was Philadelphus or Philadelphia, which was both, this was a part of Mauritania or Mauritania, and Mauritania was actually in North and South Dakota, here in North America. And of course Marrakesh, as I said, was Philadelphia, and Marrakesh, which later became known as Morocco, means sons of Cush. And so this royal family, or convocation of royal families rather, the 13 royal families, some of the names, if you read in the imperial records or the continental records, as opposed to the congressional records, some of the names were Agenor, Agathocles, Ayak, Barca, which, by the way, Barca is another name or an ancient name for Chicago. And after Barca, it became known as Libya, or Ludim. And the people, the Moorish people, were known as Lachabim at that time. But anyway, as I said, one of the names, Ayak, the English equivalent, believe it or not, would be Ajax. So what they've done is the Albion has reduced many of these royal names and titles to toilet cleansers and other derogatory things, which I find to be very interesting. Now, also the name Agathocles, which, as I said, was one of the names of the royal families, is where we get the Aga title for governor, which is, of course, also used in the Turkish language as well. But anyway, as I said, many of these legal documents were not in the lingua anglicae, or the English language, until actually a century later. So again, you're looking at the time of the federal Christian European influence under bankruptcy reconstruction between 1861 and 1878, which was one of the reasons, apart from many reasons, of the Civil War, because it was to give them enough time to actually change or alter many of the salient records, to, as I said, to translate them, to omit things by, again, omission or commission. And so it gave them enough time to pray and alter these records, and to ultimately give you the popularized versions that you read today in your miseducation system. And so the original, of course, is always under lock and key, and you get the neutered version or neutered translation. But back to 1774, when the Corporate Family Trust was organized or created, one of the main reasons for the convocation or consolidation was due to the fact that the Moorish sway in the Americas was on the fast track of decline because of the 300 years continental wars between the Franciscan Dutch and the Mozarabs. The Mozarabs is basically another term, a name for Cretan or Christian Spaniards. Now during this time, during the 300 years continental wars, you had many of the older generations of Moors who were dying off. Many were prisoners of war. The newer generations were being born in war camps, and were now being nationally lobotomized via Cretan reclassification and socio-behavioral modification. And this is what Prophet Noble Drali is referring to in chapter 47, verses 16 and 17, when he tells us that through sin and disobedience every nation has suffered slavery due to the fact that they honored not the Cretan principles of their fathers or forefathers. And this is why the nationality of the Moors was taken away from them in 1774, and the words Negro, Black, and Colored were given to the Asiatics of America who were of Moorish descent. So anyway, but the loss of nationality, even though it's understood that the nationality of the Moors was taken away in 1774, it's important to understand that the nationality meant the majority of Moors and not all of the Moors, including, for example, the royals of the Continental, what later became the Continental Congress, and about 1,000 Moorish factions. But understanding the seriousness of the situation, these Moors of the Royal Convocation was again the fundamental reason for, one, the formation of the Corporate Family Trust, the National Trust, in again what later became the United States, and two, the establishing of the federal political system for the Albion Male, as this was a part of the Moors' C3 Communications Operation Command Stratagem, or military strategy, that was used to, as strange as it may sound to some, it was to ensure the survival of future generations. You should also know that even though the Moors, or the Moorish Navy rather, more specifically, fell in West Palestine on the Sea of Galilee in 1795, the royal families nonetheless were still running government from behind the scenes until Civil War era reconstruction. So initially, the congressional membership consisted of the above 13 rulers and key family members that eventually comprised 35 members, and finally the 20 observers. Only the Bey kings, princes, and governors were eligible to serve as praesens, or president, commander-in-chief, of which there were between the years of 1774 and 89, 16 to be exact, who not only did they, like presidents of the modern era, sign congressional laws, treaties, military orders, but in addition presided over judicial congressional cases. And in 1775, under the Henry Middleton and Peyton Randolph second term administration, was the beginning of the so-called or infamous American Revolution. Now what's very interesting about this is because of how we've been, again, miseducated and taught history, etc., we tend to look at it compartmentally. In other words, we think of the American Revolution, okay, Crispus Attucks, that whole thing, and Boston, and Paul Revere, etc. And nothing else was going on. But as I mentioned earlier, you had a 300 years continental war that was going on in many parts of the continent. In parts of, Guaymi Cuna, known as Panama, Maco Tucana Huitoto, known as Colombia, Yonamam, Arawak Carib, Venezuela, Utuapaque Pima, Mexico, Maya, Guatemala, Araucanian, Chile, Diaguita, Bolivia, and Apibon, Paraguay. So in 1775, this American Revolution took place principally in the northeast areas of Brutium, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Idumea, which are known. Brutium was actually also known as Pergamos, which if you read the so-called Christian Bible in Revelations, they talk about Pergamos, which is Brutium, Massachusetts. Another name for it was Comasacumcanit, which I'll talk about that in a minute concerning Hano Bay's legal document, the Bornstone, which is an ancient document, ancient Moorish document, that I also talk about.
People that need to hear it. It's like medicine for the soul. So those people that are needing to hear this message are going to get it. So it's like, it doesn't even matter, you know, like who is involved, who's not involved. It's not about that. It's beyond that. I want to talk a little bit about your...
Yeah. It's 2:22 in the morning. You know what that means? Wake up. Primo. My vibrations be aligned with the universe. Cosmic soul for those living on the music search. I swear I really be trying to put the music first, but listeners ain't listening to lyrics, they can use a hearse. For that dead mental state that they hear today, I wrote these lines hard enough to make the fucking pencil break. My bad iPhone, cause when my mind roams, I travel through dimensions, transcending every time zone. I can be in Atlanta and touch a soul and some moon to the aura of an African spirit moving all through the track. When you hear it, that's cause my pops was an Asiatic and my mama was from Canada, so there you have it. I've been called nigga, I've been called cracker. Yeah, know I was sent here to piss off rappers. If you fake, fuck you. I hope it's hard when you learn. They'll catch you sleeping in that black hole when karma returns. It's about to get ugly for humans that's both-sided. You either flying high with love or got a co-pilot driving you around with a frown, doing no smiling. Spirits in the studio with me, I call that ghost writing. JD, Riggs, what up? We trying to get some better love, a better product, maybe some better drugs, a better number, better tag, a better plug, some better cooked food, better water, better grub. Can't get enough. I'm talking about some better love, a better job, better money with a better check. If you get a better girl with a fatter ass, but the heart ain't warm, do she got better sex? No, but yes, we think we getting better love, but do we really need a better car, better ride, or do we need appreciation, some better eyes, so we can see the universe working every time it's in disguise? I say we want some better love, some better police that won't shoot us up, a better neighborhood where ain't no shooters, plus a corner store that got more than Cheetos and sugar water drinks. Sometimes we want fruit for lunch, cause we all want that better love, some better education and better schools. It seems like we go from first grade to college and still don't get the knowledge, like they trying to raise better fools, and they ain't cool. I can tell you about some better love. We can't complain wishing that we had a better life. We gotta use the one we got. Close your eyes, look inside, meditate, free your mind, and I guarantee you'll find a better light. You can show the world some better love. Be a L, be the truth, a better example. You can light millions of flames along the way and not burn out your light, so you'll never need a better candle. A lot to handle, but I know we getting better love. Where we going, where we headed, a better direction, but the obstacles is needed. The pain and the grieving is growth in disguise for better progression, a better lesson.
Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. It is Maria Morena Torres Bay, aka Sex Energy Goddess 13, and tonight is a very, very special show. I'm very excited. If you're just tuning in, you just missed the listening party. And the only way that you can check out Dion Primo's Room 13 is that I am DionPrimo.com, and you have to download it. I gotta get Dion on the line. So give me a second. Talk amongst yourselves.
¿Cómo estás?
Hola, Dion Primo. ¿Cómo estás?
Yo, what's going on with you?
Man, everything is fantastic.
Everything good?
Yeah, everything is good. 13 good. Ready for that resurrection and rebirth. We just got done listening to some of the songs on Room 13. I was having a little listening party before you got here.
Okay.
So, man, the music is fabulous and fantastic, and I am so ready to get in tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been talking about him for the last half an hour, and I'm very excited to introduce him to you tonight. Please welcome Mr. Dion Primo.
Yo. We did this like 2 years ago, remember?
Yes. But I was talking about how, we said that we were going to have this interview. We were going to do it again when the time was right, when the songs came out. And it was so funny because you would give me the songs and I wanted to put them out so bad. And of course I used them in some of the videos, but I had no idea that you was in doing this kind of work. And I'm so, man, I heard the album for the first time last week, and I was like, we got to do the interview immediately. And so you're here today. So thank you so much for being here with me today, Dion Primo.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, and thank you to everybody that's here tuned in with us.
Thank you so much, everybody that's tuned in. Okay, so I want to get right down to it. What's been going on since you started this project to now? Like, I know that so many things have changed, and you're doing this project completely, independent from any majors. So what has that process been like for you?
I mean, really, that process is hard. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like starting your own garden. You gotta dig at the surface. You gotta get the dirt ready. You gotta get the seeds ready. It's not really just about the fruit. Like, a lot of people, they hear the music, but most people don't know how much it actually takes, energy wise and just everything wise to really get a project out. So it's been crazy, but it's been beautiful though. I got my queen Lex helping me with it too. So
yes,
good team behind me too, sound killers, and a lot of people. Like, it take a lot, just people to hear them little 3-4 minute songs. Like, you wouldn't imagine how many hours, weeks, in this case, 2 years in the making.
Yes, and now, I was telling everybody that you're not a stranger to this industry. You just decided to go another route and go completely independent and do your own thing. How much of a struggle was that from going from mainstream to doing something independently on your own? Tell me what would you say was the biggest obstacle? We know that it takes a lot of work. We know that it's, a lot of time, but what would you say is the biggest obstacle in terms of being, coming from a large industry to being independent?
I mean, really, the hardest part is, people know me as a songwriter. I write R&B songs. I write a lot of rap hooks, and it's not necessarily the world that we're involved in. You know what I mean? Some of it is it's the stuff you hear on the radio.
Right.
It's the fun stuff. But the hardest part for me is really just getting it heard. Like getting it heard on that platform. But at the end of the day, I'm realizing that what we're doing and what we're bringing with VIN Radio and New Love Order and people that's trying to push this type of message is the people tired of the other shit. Like, they want some new stuff to support, you know what I mean? And get behind and be proud to say, hey, man, I rock with this, you know what I mean? Like, and it's just all about finding those people. And that's what we're doing. And we got like over 50,000 listened since we released the project. And for me, that's crazy, you know. I only got a couple thousand people on Twitter, you know, following. So I'm just like so thankful, you know.
Yeah.
I really love the journey of everything how it's going. But yeah, the biggest challenge is probably just getting it heard, you know. How do you get people to listen? That's the tricky part, you know.
Right.
It's like eating new restaurants. People don't like new food. Like, they like what they like, you know. Same with the music.
Right, absolutely. And, you know, what's really cool about it is that, you know, I'm coming from a bit of a different perspective because I definitely see what it is. I know that right now, this is what we need because people are going through stuff. So, you know, you got your party music and you got your people that are listening to that. But then you have a whole group of people, and there's 13 viewers right now, 13 love, 13 bliss, 13 health and wealth to everybody. So there's still there's a large group of people, a large percentage of the population that is sick. You know, I'm going to say that the whole population is sick. And right now, what is necessary is this healing. And your music is very healing, and that's what's necessary. And that's what makes me more confident than anything that this is going to go out to all of the people that need to hear it. It's like medicine for the soul. So those people that are needing to hear this message are going to get it. So it's like, it doesn't even matter, you know, like who is involved, who's not involved. It's not about that. It's beyond that. I want to talk a little bit about your...
Negativity is a hell of a drug. Hey, I can't even lie. I feel good as a motherfucker right now, man. Life is good. So why focus on the bullshit? You lost your job, ain't got no work. Your money fucked up, it could always be worse. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. Your nigga still cheating, you don't feel the love. But negativity is a hell of a drug. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. I used to only care about the shit I didn't have. Like that white Lex when I pull up to the Ave. Looking at my car like, damn, it's a bucket, but the shit still rise. So I gotta say fuck it. Cause I remember when I didn't even have a vehicle. Only going far as my motherfucking feet ago. The best weed to blow wasn't available, so I took the seeds out and stems out. Sometimes you gotta weed certain friends out. Your zone, cause when the shit gets realer, then they gone. I remember getting fired from DirecTV. Happy than a motherfucker when they let go of me. I ain't get mad, I celebrated. That's when the music picked up and I elevated. Sometimes the bullshit that be coming your way is only making room for the real shit to stay. You lost your job, ain't got no work. Your money fucked up, it could always be worse. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. Your nigga still cheating, you don't feel the love. But negativity is a hell of a drug. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. All I wanted for Christmas was a bad bitch. Got the pussy, realized I wasn't missing shit. You got a good girl, you better hold her down. I'm in the ATL when I be going out. I see niggas spinning, trying to keep up with television. That really just tells your vision to limit your credit cards and go and get better bras that looks like every star on magazines and videos. Yeah, that type of look. How to be a sucker, I ain't read that type of book. Scared to be yourself, I ain't been that type of shook. So why you been afraid? When life gives you lemons, fuck lemonade. Time to make a different drink. And nowadays, on the real, I got a whole new recipe. Never let the negativity get the best of me. Cause all the bullshit that come along the way is only making room for the real shit to stay. You lost your job, ain't got no work. Your money fucked up, it could always be worse. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. Your nigga still cheating, you don't feel the love. But negativity is a hell of a drug. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. I remember I was trying to get that Rolex, doing everything I could to get some more checks. All I want in my life right now is a big booty queen that like to get piped down. A call from the fam to let me know they good. And I'ma say what's up when I get back to the hood. A home-cooked meal with no meat, no dairy. Some alkaline water, fresh fruits, and the veggies. A blunt if I wanna roll up and get creative. 2K with the homies on the PlayStation. Plus a massage from a real bad Asian. Incense burning when I do my meditation. Buddy pass when I'm trying to do a vacation. Hit the studio in LA and be amazing. And any bullshit that comes along the way is only making room for the real shit to stay. You lost your job, ain't got no work. Your money nigga still cheating. You don't feel the love, but negativity is a hell of a drug. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them. Problems is a bitch, you might as well fuck them.
What?
Happy today.
Are you?
Yes.
Stay with me. I don't need no more reefer, 'cause I'm feeling nice right now. Yeah. I don't see no evil, 'cause I'd rather be blinded now. Yeah. 'Cause I'm living in the now. I'm happy in the now. I'm focused in the now. I'm breathing in the now. I'm living in the now. I'm dreaming in the now. I'm loving in the now. There's so much power in the word now, now. So much power in the word now. Let me explain. You can read now backwards and spell one, then twist it up and you spell on. Take ownership of now, then win tomorrow. Ownership of now, then win tomorrow. Read now backwards and spell one, then twist it up and you spell on. Take ownership of now, then win tomorrow. Ownership of now, then win tomorrow. Oh, 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 oh. And all this ain't no interlude. Let this music get into you. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. I love you. Yes, I'm healthy in the now. I'm wealthy in the now. No TV in the now. Don't need no money in the now. It's just me in the now. Just me in the now. Just me in the now. It's just me in the now, now.
very impressed with him. And so have a couple other brothers who've had a chance to meet him. And he's going to be here just for a short time, and while he's here, I wanted to give him an opportunity to come and bring some of the unique information that he have discussed with us over the last few days. And without further ado, I bring to you and present to you the noble Kabir Uriel Bey. Let's greet this brother with a hearty hand clap and a hearty Islam.
Islam. Islam. First, I'd like to give all praises to Allah, great God of the universe. I give honor to the Prophet Noble Drali, to the forerunner, Marcus Garvey, and I give honor to everything that pertains to Islam. I give honor to our national flag, seal, national seal that is, and Constitution. And I give respect to the banner as well. That's right. What it is. However, the reason, or one of the reasons as to why I'm here today is to share some truths with you about the banner, the national flag, your nationality, often referred to as totum populi corpus in Latin, which is your national language. Because when the Prophet brought back your nationality, your vast estate, he also brought back your language, of which we have been, how can I say, we've been led to believe that the Latin language is European, or it was, you know, created by them and is therefore theirs. However, that is not the case. But first things first, I'd like to have us get an understanding about our national flag, about what it is and its importance. Now, you see here we have the red flag with the 5-pointed green star in the center, and we have the banner next to it, right? But now let's ask ourselves a question. Are we citizens? And what kind of citizens are we? And how does that correlate with this flag and this banner? Or what are the correlations? First, we know that we are Moorish Americans. We're Moors, and we proclaimed ourselves to be Moors. Great. That's beautiful. And some of us now make the claim that we're citizens. But now the question is, what kind of citizen are you? Now, when the Prophet came on the scene and did what he did, he said, I've come to put you back into the constitutional fold, right? So that you can take your place in the affairs of men. Now, if we have something known as the United States Constitution, right? And if we say we are citizens, and our national name being Moorish American, our titles being Il and Bey, well then again, the question is, what type of citizen are you? Well, I'd like to say, for the record, that I do hereby declare that I am a United States citizen. That's right. Now, I know a lot of you have been learning a lot about this Johnny Liberty stuff, patriot information, and about different things about the law, so forth and so on. But don't get it confused, because a lot of that information, as some of you well know, has nothing to do with us. The reason why I say I'm a United States citizen is because if I know that my Moorish foremothers and forefathers established, ordained and established that Constitution so that the European might have a right to function, right, for his social, political, and economic freedom, of which, yes, we know he breached the agreement and forfeited everything, but it says in the preamble, or exordium, which that preamble says, or starts off with, we the people of the United States, right? So we understand that one nation, namely the Moorish nation, ordained and established a constitution for the European colonial settler, of which he is. It says, do ordain, I'm fast forwarding a little, do ordain and establish this constitution for the United States of America, right? So again, that means one nation establishing a constitution for another said nation. Notice why and how I said. Because the United States of America was never a nation, nor can it ever be a nation. It is a corporation, and only a corporation, because the banner, which you see here, was for, again, as I said, their social, political, and economic freedom. That's all, and for trade, or commercia, commerce. All right? So, as I said, I do hereby declare that I am a United States citizen. And I pledge my allegiance to the national flag, United States flag, seal, Great Seal, and Constitution. All right? So, I just want to make sure that we have an understanding about that. So, to take it a step further, we need to get an understanding now as to where and how the Constitution applies. Many of us have been led to believe that, well, you know, the Constitution doesn't matter anymore because they pretty much ignore it. And many of us have found this to be the case when we find ourselves in court, all right? Whenever any kind of action is brought against us, whether it's civil or criminal, and you make mention of the Constitution, many times you'll even hear the magistrate, not judge because there are no judges save for the people, you'll hear the magistrate say, well, if you mention that Constitution one more time, I'm going to hold you in contempt. Well, even though it may appear as though they have, in a sense, obfuscated their constitutional obligation, well, let it be known for the record that I'm here as the people of the United States to enforce the law, as only the people can. But you must know, first and foremost, that you are the people, right? And the oath to which they took is, as we say, hear ye, all you constitutional servants of, by, and for the people. Right? Namely, the people of the United States have taken an oath. An oath is an imprecation. An imprecation is also known as what? A curse. Meaning that if you violate this oath, as we know they have, that means that justice must now catch you. Right? And is not justice one of our 5 principles? Right? So when love, truth, peace, and freedom are violated, then justice must surely take its course. So, it is therefore due to the criminal violations that we, the people, under the principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, do now, with regards to the unrelenting treason, unconstitutional perfidy, which is another word for treason, and misrepresentation, and I can think of a lot of other words, do now breathe into legal and lawful existence as only the divine, noble, highborn, birthright, bloodline, Moorish nobility, or the heirs of the Moorish nobility, namely us, breathe into legal, lawful existence the only divine rule of law to let you know, in no uncertain terms, again, that justice will catch you. Now, I say this, and a lot of us may say, well, okay, fine. This guy or this fellow has no conscience, and you can tell him this, that, and the other. You can think that, you know, you can get him told or whatever, but he's not going to listen. But I beg to differ. And the reason why I say that is because if you are who you say you are, and you are a manifestation of truth, and you stand on a firm foundation of truth, and you are the divine lawgivers and lawmakers, Muslim noble mothers and sons, genatrix, which is another term for mother, sons, filius, well then I say, execute the law. Let it be known, openly and notoriously, in all arenas, whether it be international, national, federal, state, local, wherever. All right? And one of the reasons why that hasn't been done as of this time, for the most part, is that many of us have been, again, running around chasing other individuals who don't even really know themselves. And when I refer to these so-called patriots, etc. But let it be known that I and those like me are the only true patriots. Because patriot only means bonus civis, which means good citizen. And we are the only true citizens here that outrank any other in society. Right? So even though initially, when the Constitution was ordained and established, and we upgraded this guy's status to a citizen of sorts, he still was not a citizen who had all of the protections, immunities at law that you have. To a degree he did, but again, when he breached and violated that contract, or that charter, constitutional charter, well again, all of that was forfeited, went out the window. This takes us into the area of the bankruptcy. Now, many of you have heard things about the bankruptcy. I'm sure individuals have touched on it. However, very few have been able to substantiate any of what they say. And you know that when you deal with this guy, you can't come to him with halfway information. You can't say, well, you know, I'm not a part of the bankruptcy and this, that, and the other, or the bankruptcies of 1930 and 33 or 30 through 38. That's all fine, well, and good, but I mean, you got to come with some hard, concrete evidence. Now, we know that when he filed for this corporate bankruptcy in favor of his principals, namely the international bankers, that meant that everything that he was doing at that point had to be changed, or at least so they felt it had to be changed, or the dictum was that it had to be changed. So all procedures of law were changed. Everything was blended into what they call one form of action, or one form of pleading. All right? And this one form of pleading blended all of the so-called jurisdictional procedures together. Right? Many of you have heard about the common law jurisdiction. You've heard about equity and international admiralty maritime, right, which is supposedly the law of the sea, which has been brought further inland. However, I'm not here to get into arguments, if you will, about the different jurisdictions, this, that, and the other, because I'm not trying to fall into this guy's trap. However, I know that whatever procedure it is he says that he's functioning under is under a colorable jurisdiction at best and an unconstitutional one, right? So now when they talk about, well, okay, fine, he filed for bankruptcy and the procedure of law was changed and therefore the Constitution was suspended. Well, again, I beg to differ. It only appeared to be suspended mainly, primarily because we, the people, were asleep. Right? So, I really can't blame him for doing what he did. All right? However, to give you some evidentiary documentation, or where you yourself can do some research and check it out, because as many say, or as some say, I don't want you to believe any of what it is I'm telling you. I want you to check it out for yourself so you can see. Well, we know that in 1933, under the so-called New Deal democracy, or the beginning of the New Deal democracy, when President Roosevelt took office, said president, that is, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the bankruptcy was declared or expressed in executive orders. Those executive orders are 6073, 6102, 6111, and 6260. Sure. Those executive orders are 6073, 6102, 6111, and 6260, which was confirmed by Congress, or said Congress, because I'm consenting to nothing. So you'll notice everything that I say is much like the prophet expressed in our divine constitution and bylaws, this said government. When he said, obey the laws of this said government, the prophet knew what he was doing. The reason being is because when he said, obey the laws of this said government, and when the prophet was on the scene at that time, he was talking about constitutional law. He wasn't talking about bombarded rules and regulations, all right, which are decrees of council, which are forced or unlawfully and illegally forced upon the people against their will and without their lawful consent. So, again, back to this proof or evidentiary documentation. As I said, Congress confirmed this bankruptcy under the House of Joint Resolutions, June 5th, 1933. 73rd Congress, first session. All right? And the purpose of confirming this bankruptcy was to repudiate or to suspend the gold standard and abrogate the gold clause, right? And to impair the obligations and considerations of their constitutional obligation or oath, or juris siurandi, which is another term for oath. Now, again, I use these Latin terms, as I mentioned earlier, because it's important to know your language. And in understanding language, generally, more specifically your language, there are a lot of things that will be opened up to you. A lot of doors will be opened. So, getting back to the documents, if you will. So after the House of Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress, first session, you also have something known as the Senate Report Number 93-549. This came along much later in 1973. But of course, it talked about this bankruptcy and all of these specifics. Now, in Senate Report number 93-549, you'll find a lot of information, documentation about the executive orders for the so-called existing national emergency, of which, for the record, there are at least 4 existing emergencies. All right, starting, as I said, with 1933, fast-forwarding to December 16th, 1950, under the Truman administration, which was a national emergency, of which was declared by proclamation, a presidential proclamation. And I'm going to focus a little on the proclamations in a second. and tell you why they are so important here in terms of this fraud being perpetrated and perpetuated here in the continental United States. But as I was saying, the Senate Report number 93-549 goes into these particular or specific proclamations. As I said, December 16th, 1950. Also, it goes on to talk about the national emergencies which were declared by President Nixon during the Nixon administration. March 28th, 1970, Nixon declared a national emergency due to the postal workers' strike, because they were striking against, if you will, the said federal government or the federal corporate government because of the inflation on the paper bills of credit, what many of you refer to as money, yes. But these paper bills of credit, what some of you may even also say FRNs, Federal Reserve Notes, which cannot be notes, because a note, as the brother mentioned earlier, we're talking about promissory notes, and a promissory note is to promise that someone is going to pay you something. But on these particular bills of credit, there is no promise. It just says for all private and public debts, right? That's it. So they're not promising you anything. And the only promise that they made, which was an unconstitutional promise, were to the bankers, the international bankers. That's all. However, the purpose as to why we're here and as to why we're enforcing the law is so that we will let the said European slave colonial settler, because yes, he is still a slave. How do I know this? When he forfeited that constitutional contract, his oath, and that charter, that means he went back into perpetual slavery. That's right, here in the United States. So you have a slave sitting in your palace, in the White House. You have slaves, I'm not even just talking about Negroes, I'm talking about the European, yes, sitting in Congress, or said Congress. So now, if you are supposed to be a citizen, a United States citizen, a Moorish American, within a constitutional fold, now the question is, what are you going to do? And the reason why I'm giving you this documentary evidence is so that you can use it to your benefit and to the benefit of the Moorish nation. Right? Because what does the prophet say? It says it takes finance to build a nation. Now when I say finance, I'm talking about the only pecuniary medium of exchange in the Constitution under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1. Gold and silver, and anything to the contrary is notwithstanding. Right. And as per Article 6 of that same Constitution, he has a fiduciary obligation to uphold that. And the simple fact that he is not functioning with that says that his time is up and he's got to go. Now, I'm not saying this in hate, I'm saying this in love. The prophet said it himself, said the guy has to go back to Europe from whence he came. So, back to the bankruptcy. Of course, this is all dealing with the bankruptcy, directly and indirectly. But you can also look in something known as Public Law 94-564. In Public Law 94-564. Public Law 94-564, which you can also find some information on that in the same Senate Report number 93-549, but Public Law 94-564 is a document unto itself. And that document speaks of the said Secretary of the Treasury, the United States Treasury, who took on another capacity. He was functioning now in a de facto capacity, contrary to his constitutional capacity. And this de facto capacity, corporate, criminal capacity, as I would call it, for the federal corporate United States, for the sole purpose of administering and administrating public policy. All right? Public policy only means a corporate policy for the corporate federal government, the corporate states, the county, etc., for the Union State Society, namely U.S. That is why I am not a U.S. citizen, nor do I care to be, nor will I ever be, now that I know who I am and who my foremothers and forefathers are, and who the prophet is. Because make no mistake, the prophet is doing a great deal of work on the soul plane. But getting back to Public Law 94-564, you will find information on the December 16th, 1950 national emergency, which was declared by President Truman because of the Korean War, that the Secretary of the Treasury would now become the receiver in bankruptcy. So now if you are a receiver, again, reorganizing, so when they talk about reconstruction, well, there have been many reconstruction periods, not just during slavery, but many. And the reconstruction period of 1950, which was only to, perpetuate the bankruptcy, because this was the second bankruptcy in which they filed for, because they came out of World War II in worse shape than they were in prior to going in. All right, this was one of the reasons why the League of Nations was instituted under what they call the, well, if you look under Title 22 of the United States Code Annotated, Section 287, you will see information on how and why the United Nations was created. It was created for the sole purpose of being a law merchant entity to carry out the corporate public policy of the federal corporate United States, and more specifically, the public policy of the international bankers. Now, I know this is probably a lot of information, and I hope I'm not going too fast. If I am at any point in time, please, raise your hand or give a nod or something, and I will slow down. All right? Yes?
Along the lines of what you're speaking, I couldn't find any turmoil when they filed bankruptcy, when they came out with the Federal Reserve note. I said, how did the people, well, I thought the people were, I said, the government do this to them without something documented that there was a riot.
Yeah.
Now you just answered my question. We're the people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. So, many of us don't realize that the brother just mentioned that, don't realize how much weight that carries. So when you, those of you who have been around in the 60s and have heard many speeches where people talk about power to the people, those individuals don't even know what they're talking about. All right? But when I say we the people, what do I mean? People means citizen, and citizen means people, which therefore means you are a member of society. And when I say society, I mean societas, which is another term for, get this, confederation. All right? So now, many of us were under the impression that, well, once the Constitution came along, well, the Federation went to the wayside, or the Confederation, rather, went to the wayside, and that was it. It was over and done with. But make no mistake, in Article 6, it talks about how, though, the European being under oath and obligation, a constitutional oath and obligation is to uphold this Constitution as well as all of the previous treaties, obligations under the Confederation. All right? So again, the Confederation is still alive and kicking. But not getting away again from Public Law 94-564, and I'm spending a lot of time on that. The reason being is because a lot of things were done under that particular so-called public law. All right? Yes?
Okay. And then the information you change, I mean, the information given about that 564. I mean, if we research them, will it be in a law library or will it be in, is it possible for us to go to like a main library or a law library to get that information?
Yeah, if you cannot find it on the internet, because some of the documents may not be on the internet, because of them being as old as they are, and then some of them may not be on the internet for obvious reasons, because the internet, for the most part, supplies general information. But you shouldn't really have any problems finding it in any library, public library or law library, etc. I know this to be true because I found the documents there. The executive orders, public law, as I said, 94-564, the House Joint Resolution 192. And you also must understand that this is how the Social Security Administration came into being. The Social Security Administration was one of many socialist committees, or communist organizations that was formed purportedly to deal with the said national emergency or economic emergency. Couldn't be a national emergency because, again, as we said, America was never a nation. Right? And when they, by proclamation, each president or said president, Roosevelt, Truman, Nixon, when they made these proclamations and executive orders, etc., which brought about, how can I say, some 470 provisions of so-called federal law and statutes that gave unbridled power to the president, unconstitutional. Because before I even go any further, let it be known, a lot of us were running around talking about federal this, federal that, and we're the federal government, and blah, blah, blah. No. There is absolutely nothing in the Constitution that says federal. The word is not in there. You can look at it or look for it anagrammatically speaking. If you want to look at it like a lexigram, backwards, up, down, sideways, in or out, there is no federal anything in the Constitution. All right? I'm sorry? No. Confederation has nothing to do with federal. All right? So we have a bunch of individuals who have basically assumed an authority only again because we haven't said anything. Yes? Islam.
What was the prophet alluding to when he said that I made you a nation within a nation?
Okay.
Islam. Question, what was the prophet alluding to when he said that I made you all a nation within a nation?
Well, we have to understand that, again, when the prophet said, I made you a nation within a nation, you have to understand where we were at that time, where our mindset was, right? And our understanding of things, of which is a lot clearer now than it was during 1928. The prophet, of course, being several years or eons or light years ahead of us, and of course, he had to be. But, I mean, for example, when he said, these lessons and instructions are for all those who love Jesus. Well, many of us were Christians at that time. I mean, matter of fact, Islam prior to the prophet wasn't even mentioned in North America or the Northern Hemisphere. It was a crime to say Islam anything. everybody jumped on the bandwagon after the prophet came and did what he did. So I'm saying that to say that the term nation within a nation, which was no question, no doubt of contradiction that you are a nation, always was and will be, but for all intent and purpose, this guy in the government, etc., was referred to as a nation. But this is why the prophet went on to say, said government. Okay? I hope I answered your question. Okay. Were there any more questions before I go any further? Okay, good. Well, anyway, and the reason why I say, talking about these proclamations. The proclamations, as a matter of fact, a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, and it may sound also like I'm jumping around the place, but you'll see the thread. A lot of you have heard about, the right to travel and driving without a license and stuff like that, of which is a constitutional liberty, right? Of which cannot be deprived, or the citizen cannot be deprived without due process of law, as pursuant to but not limited to the Fifth Amendment. Okay? Notice I said as pursuant to but not limited to. Okay? But, be that as it may, the right to travel, yes, is one that, and the reason why I'm focusing on this is because many of us only see it within the confines of, okay, I'm getting in my car and I'm going from point A to point B, and I don't want the police to bother me, this, that, and the other. But when I say right to travel, I mean throughout the world. Okay? And I mean unobstructed travel, wherein no said government of any said nation who flies nothing but corporate banners, all right, will tell me, or anyone like me, that I cannot cross any of their imaginary borderlines. All right? And so when I focus on this right to travel thing, and the reason why I say this is because a lot of us who have done some research on the right to travel will find case law after case law after case law, and that's all fine, well and good. But how many of us have gone into the case law to read it? Because when you read the case law, it brings about a new understanding of what right to travel, for example, or anything else, is about. All right? For example, now this whole issue of passports. I mean, what is this about? And if we are talking about passports, well, how can a settler who is functioning, as I said, unconstitutionally, fraudulently, under trickery, coercion, compulsion, conquest, and anything else you can think of, well, how can he issue me through the said Secretary of State, who by his or her discretion, be it Madeleine Albright, yes, or any of her successors, is going to tell me again that I can go here or there, or I cannot go here or there. All right? Or again, will issue me a passport. Now, if you notice in that passport, that so-called American passport, it says under nationality, United States of America. How can United States of America be a nationality? Unless, of course, it's implying that I am a corporate entity of some kind, of which I'm not. All right? And then again, as I said, anything that he issues is unlawful at best anyway. Why? Because I know of the fraud. Right? We can find proof of that in, now this is really good evidence, or documentary evidence, or proof. And that is on May 23rd, 1933, I'm not getting away from right to travel, this ties in. May 23rd, 1933, a congressman named Louis T. McFadden brought criminal charges, or an indictment, if you will, against the comptroller of the currency, the said Secretary of Treasury of the United States, as well as the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve Bank System. And in this, what is referred to as, I can't think of the name right now, but we'll just say it was an impeachment of sorts. And it unfortunately was referred to the Judiciary Committee and buried there, of which they're still waiting for it to be acted upon. And also, for the record, Louis T. McFadden he was poisoned and never to be heard from again. But be that as it may, he left some very good information, and which talks about the misappropriation of the United States goal, or the people's goal. My goal, your goal. All right? And how they did this was very interesting. I'll just touch on some things. For example, they made false claims against the United States Treasury. And what they did was that they purchased, or I'm sorry, they initially placed United States government credit in specific amounts to foreign governments, foreign central banks have issued, private interests, namely for the purposes of the international bankers. And in so doing, they also made unlawful contracts in the name of the United States government and in the name of the United States Treasury. All right? And also purchased United States government securities with this credit, of which the people never gave them any authority to do. All right? They have been, from day one, pretty much from the time that the Constitution was ordained and established, they have made all kinds of abridgments, usurpations, etc., for their own selfish gain, as we well know. However, he goes on to talk about how everything, all of your property, including your bodies, was pledged as collateral against the debt of the federal corporate United States. And of course, with the advent of the New Deal democracy and, under the Roosevelt administration and the public policy for the purposes of administrating the bankruptcy, they have devised many ways, of course, of getting you to comply or to deceive you into declaring yourself as a U.S. citizen or a citizen of the United States. And again, we know that the "of" is the preposition of which connects you to the corporation. However, I am a citizen, as I said, a United States citizen and a citizen in the United States. If you look at Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution, it talks about those citizens of the several states shall have the privileges and immunities of those citizens in the several states. And those citizens who were in the several states were us. All right? So, as I said, you can look that up at any time. The May 23rd, 1933 Articles of Impeachment, that's what it's called. All right? And Louis T. McFadden, of which I'm not surprised he did not implicate Congress for the simple reason that he, at that time, was a congressman. But Congress, of course, was as guilty as sin and as guilty as the rest of the bunch. All right? So, if there are any other questions before I go any further? Any questions at all? Yes?
I have a question about the United Nations. Hello, brother. I had a question about the United Nations again. You said it was created for merchant services or something like that, international. Could you explain that?
Law merchant.
1 second.
Law merchant only means commercial law. And everything you know right now is functioning under commercial law or in commerce. All right? And everything that was pledged as collateral against the debt is assumed to be functioning and a part of commerce. Right? All of these set bill of rights, Amendments 1 or Articles 1 through 8 have been statutized in commerce under the so-called statutory jurisdiction and procedures, of which there is no statutory jurisdiction and there is no statutory procedure. Why? Because the Constitution makes no mention of it. You see? But the Constitution does provide for the equity and the admiralty, but it is not the constitutional equity and admiralty. Okay? However, this is the law merchant. And just backtracking for a minute and also in answer to your question about the law merchant, when I mentioned early on one form of action or one form of pleading, that only means that they hodgepodged the law to blend everything together so that there would be no distinctions in or at law. And when I say at law, I mean constitutional law. All right? So now, just as in 1938, because you have to understand that when all of these other things were going on, the bankruptcy and when it was officially so-called declared, but of course not disclosed to the public at large or the people themselves, they had to have a case or a case law to legitimize the bankruptcy, right? So what they did is that they said we're going to have secret meetings, etc., to basically amend the judicial procedure so that we can function in favor of our creditors, namely the bankers. And this is why when you go into court, as I said earlier, every action that's being brought against you is a bankruptcy action, right? Under equity commercial law, with debtor-creditor law being the controlling law, right? So everything is based on the principle of someone being a debtor and someone being a creditor. However, the true or real creditor never makes an appearance. Why? Because you have these lawyers or fictions of law or waxworks or mannequins or speaking likenesses, right? Because if you look it up in the Black's Law Dictionary, you will see lawyer or attorney says representation of person. A representation of person only means fiction of law. All right? So now you have these waxworks who have, as I said, changed the law, blended the law. So, for example, in 1938, under the Erie versus Tompkins, or Erie Railroad versus Tompkins case, which was the case that changed the standing precedents of 150 years of constitutional law, or so-called common law. And at that point, that there was no more common law and constitutional law in the said federal government, this meant that Congress no longer had the power to declare substantive rules of common law applicable in a state, whether it was local or general, whether it was part of commercial law or part of the law of torts. Didn't matter. It no longer existed as far as they were concerned. And these lawyers that got together, said attorneys, judges, and the like, who are all a part of the Bar Association, as many of you know, which is a franchise of the Lawyers Guild of Great Britain, okay? They decided that, well, we are going to blend everything under what many of you have come to know, the Uniform Commercial Code. I'm not going to spend too much time on the Uniform Commercial Code because that is inconsequential to us. Because when you walk around using codes, talking about this code, that code, the other code, whether it's the United States Code or whatever code, all right, it means nothing unless you go inside the code and you read the code to understand the language. Why? Because the language is representative of the constitutional law and representative of the said common law, for which he had an obligation to function and was bound by to function under. Yes?
It's so the only free speech is on the floor of Congress. Well, following on what you're saying.
Okay. Well, no. 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 It would appear to be the case by virtue of them functioning under the law merchant principle, but that is not the case. The only free speech is, how can I say, which is enshrined in the Constitution, you know, that makes mention of it in the First Amendment, is reserved to the people. That is all. Yeah, is reserved to the people. People of the United States, that means you and me. All right? And just for the record, it is constitutional heresy. Okay, you've heard about heretics, but it is constitutional heresy to declare an unconstitutional act or a series of unconstitutional acts to be constitutional simply and only and solely because Congress deems it to be constitutional or deems an emergency to exist. There are no provisions in the Constitution that gives Congress any authority to do so. So this is why I say, and I reiterate, that you must be the ever-present vanguards of justice. Right? Islam. And so, that we know that they really, like I said, their power was, in every sense of the word, limited. But, as I said, they assert power. But again, there was no constitutional provision, no amendment, no anything to abolish, suspend, abrogate the Constitution in any sense of the word. All right? So even though there are a lot of people, and I've heard a lot of Moors, I've heard a lot of patriots, and everybody say, well, Constitution is suspended. No, it was never suspended. Did Congress ordain and establish the Constitution? No, the people did. Right? So as per, or as pursuant to the 9th Amendment, right? All rights reserved to the people, right? Those rights enumerated in the Constitution, right? Are you with me? Islam. Shall not be denied or disparaged. Okay, to paraphrase. So, Amendments 9 and 10 are expressly reserved to the people. Okay? The other thing about these proclamations, executive orders, national emergencies, all of these things that tie in, that fit in, and are integral parts of this bankruptcy, right? This global bankruptcy, as per the Depression, etc., and everything that ensued thereafter, only pertains to persons, individuals, corporations, partnerships, associations. So all of the restrictions laid thereupon had nothing to do with the people, and they knew it themselves, which is why it only specifies persons, of which I am not. All right? And this is why I say when you step into any of these so-called Union States courts, which are only the people's courts, but it appears to be a Union States court because you've got a European settler sitting up there in a black robe, right? Again, yes, perpetrating a fraud. So now, whenever you walk into that court, it becomes a constitutional court. I don't care how many admiralty flags they got up there. That means nothing to me. Your first obligation is to me and those like me, namely the Moorish nation, namely the people of the United States. All right? So, this is why the Moors, or the Moorish nation, have declared their independence. That's right. Did you know that? That as a nation, we have declared our independence. The document of which is recorded in the United Nations with the Secretary General. What's his name? Kofi Annan, yes. But, Kofi Annan. But be that as it may, well, you know, again, we need no validation from any of them. Even though our national flag is flying down there on 45th Street, right, in Manhattan, what they call the Moroccan flag, which we know different. And we now know that it is not only the Moorish flag, we now know that it's the United States flag. All right? That's why I say I pledge my allegiance, right, to the United States flag. Why, how do I know that? Because, see now, a lot of Moors have come on the scene talking about the so-called continental United States flag with the cedar tree, you know, and a red flag with a green tree and all of that. This, that, that's all fine, well and good, and that's nice. However, that has no saving power. Why? Because the prophet didn't bring that. And for those of us that think we can get ahead of the prophet, you are sadly mistaken. Just because you got a few facts and figures and, you know, think you're going to rock the house now, it ain't happening. All right? And the reason why I know this is the United States flag, apart from the prophet bringing back our flag, or bringing it to us, is when declaring myself at any of these said Union States courts, or the People's Courts of the United States, and of all of the bolsterous words and things that these magistrates say or use or threats, etc., I have yet to see one refute or deny this flag. As a matter of fact, I know of instances where they have told the court officer, bailiff, etc., to remove that flag. And they weren't talking about this one. They were talking about the so-called continental United States flag and whatever else, all right? Or what is also referred to as vexillum. Vexillum. V-E-X-I-L-L-U-M is the Latin term for flag. V-E-X-I-L-L-U-M. Vexillum. The term is also, unfortunately, used for banner. All right? When you start to get into the science of flags. All right? But as I said, and I will reiterate this every so often, that our status, well, there is none beyond that here in the continental United States. It is ne plus ultra. Again, meaning that we outrank anybody else in society. Okay? And I hate to be redundant, but I keep saying this ever so often just to plant it into your subconscious as to who you are. And not just a bunch of individuals or Negroes. And they weren't talking about this one. They were talking about the so-called continental United States flag and whatever else, all right? Or what is also referred to as vexillum. Vexillum. V-E-X-I-L-L-U-M is the Latin term for flag. V-E-X-I-L-L-U-M. Vexillum. The term is also, unfortunately, used for banner. All right? When you start to get into the science of flags. All right? But as I said, and I will reiterate this every so often, that our status, well, there is none beyond that here in the continental United States. It is ne plus ultra. Again, meaning that we outrank anybody else in society. Okay? And I hate to be redundant, but I keep saying this ever so often just to plant it into your subconscious as to who you are. And not just a bunch of individuals or Negroes with a story on the street corner philosophizing, talking about, you know, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other, but actually being able to establish justice in any of these courts, in any said national and international civic arena, in any forum. Any forum. Any. All Were there any quick questions about any of the documents, or did you need any other information on that? Just for the record, there's also another document, Public Law 95-147, which talks about all of the said banks being under the control of the Secretary of the Treasury, said Secretary of the Treasury, who's also referred to as the governor of the fund. See, in other words, all of the delegated powers of authority were transferred and redelegated, shall I say, to the Secretary of the Treasury, who now is functioning, like I said, in his international banker capacity, more or less for the bankers, which again, you will find evidence of that in Public Law 94-564. This is Public Law 95-147, for those of you who didn't get that. And that all of the banks would be under the direction of.
Islam. My question is thought, dealing with all of this, that I understand that, when the prophet was on the scene, which dealt with the issue of right to travel, I understand the prophet had no driver's license, the prophet had no social security number, and a lot of us were going into this, through our parents, these contracts, these agreements, and our parents had no knowledge or idea about who they were. And even to this day, I hear Moors coming to the temple wanting to add Earl Bay to their Social Security contracts or driver license. What are your thoughts on that? And should we, as Moorish Americans, be even going that route?
Peace. Islam. Well, for the time being that, I know some of us might be receiving whatever checks we're receiving and this, that, and the other to make ends meet. And until such time there is an official changing of the guard, it stands to reason that you will need some of these things. So, I'm dealing with sound right reasoning here. However, it doesn't say that you have to enter into these agreements unconsciously, right? If you know you have a right and one to reserve, and I don't mean UCC 1207 because, again, that's inconsequential. I'm talking about where the 9th Amendment applies, right? Wherein you know that all of these procedures, contracts, etc., which are under the so-called Uniform Commercial Code, which was created by the National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Laws, or the Council of State Governments, all right, and the American Law Institute. Well, again, I say that we know that this is all under threat, duress, and coercion, compulsion, force, and conquest. And so if you indicate as such at any time that, listen, I'm doing this under threat, duress, and coercion, well then, hey, who can presume, assume, or force upon you any kind of liability, right? And again, let's be careful here. I'm not discharging any liabilities, because to discharge a liability is like getting a conditional discharge when you have admitted guilt to a crime. And I am not guilty of anything. If I am guilty of something, that's of being a citizen within the constitutional fold and honoring my foremothers and forefathers. And again, as I reiterate, that is not guilt. But, again, like I said, that is more or less the remedy, if you will, or one of many remedies that can be used when dealing with this system, the state, federal government, etc. Okay? Being that, as I mentioned, all of the law procedures, etc., are under the public policy of the corporate federal government, and more specifically of the international bankers, their law procedure or so-called law procedure. All right? Are you clear on the, as I mentioned, the public policy? And the reason why I say that is because it is imperative that you let it be known that you're not supporting any of their administration and procedure of public policy. Right? And that anything that they are assuming, including my body, to be pledged as collateral against the debt, has been removed from their jurisdiction and venue. And I am the only party of interest. So if there is a lien there is a divine lien on this body or corpus. Right? Islam.
So for those of us who have revocated from the system, I mean, you have to now go back and re-revocate the auspices, but you just told us as the people rather than we don't want to be part of the system.
Well, yeah, so what it is exactly, it's not, let it be known that you're not expatriating, you're not doing any of those things, right? Because to expatriate, as many of you know, means to denounce your citizenship or your citizen status, because there's no such thing as ship. If we talk about citizenship, that means that someone, something, some artificial entity is granting you or giving you or bestowing upon you a title of nobility of which they have no authority. Only the people can bestow titles of nobility, of which is reserved to the people under Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8. If you look under Article 1, Section 9, right, I think it is clauses 1 through 8, those are specifically the prohibitions and limitations on and for this said government. All right? So, again, as I said, I am the only party of interest concerning any of my property, whether it's my house, whether it's my car, whether it's whatever. Okay? So I'm letting the magistrate know specifically, even if he wants to act dumb. I don't care. And none of your threats scare me. All right? Nobody's saying that you got to go up in there like a wild man or a wild woman, but speak clear with authority. Be yourselves. Know yourselves. All right? So the only rule of law, again, that I'm talking about is divine law. And the only rights that I'm talking about are divine rights. I'm not interested and I don't care about so-called sovereignty. Right? That is some cooked up something that somebody came up with. And you can either hook it up, cook it up, or look it up. All right? So again, my rights are divine. I have a divine right to travel. And there are no restrictions. I don't care about any kind of so-called, Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, June 27th, 1952, which is when they came out with this passport thing. Even though, yes, they had passports prior to that, but they were only for the sole purpose of restricting the travel of citizens of the United States, namely 14th Amendment citizens or anyone under the legal incapacity of Negroship. All right? Displaced persons, disenfranchised who have no place in society, and I mean the so-called Caucasoid as well. All right? So, again, they can talk to me about, as I said, the Immigration and Nationality Act. They can talk to me about the War Powers Act. All of that has nothing to do with me. Has nothing to do with the people. Let's get an understanding. Any kind of FAA regulation, restriction, FCC, does not apply. Those were under the proclamations, as can be found in all of the other proclamations concerning rights to travel, under war powers, under as I said, the national emergency, for the so-called existing economic emergency, of which there is no economic emergency, not where the people are concerned, not when you had an obligation to take care of the gold reserve of the people, the stock of the people, and the coinage of the people. Let's get it straight. Once and for all. Islam. Vos natio consociio civitas. We the people of the United States. In ordo ad formo unus plus perficio coniuntio, in order to form a more perfect union. Right? in order to form a more perfect union. But we see that the union is less than perfect. Right? So we now have to reconsider that. All right? We truly have to reconsider that. And even if we decide to reconsider that, in any sense of the word, guess what? As long as he's here, he still has that oath to uphold. Yes. As a brother once said, you have those who are bound and you have those who are bound to the bound. That's right. That's right. And so, again, you know, that oath goes a long way. He may not take it seriously, but I guarantee you that if you at any time challenge this guy, if you challenge him, constitutionally speaking, not commercially, not anything where you start citing codes and case law and stuff like that, no, it ain't happening. You know why? Because he'll start saying that don't apply. That was changed. That was overruled. That was overturned. But he can't say the Constitution was overturned. Where is the proof? Where is the evidence? I want to see it. And I do hereby guarantee that he will not bring forth any evidence of the kind, nor can he. You see? That's why the prophet said, I came to put you back into the constitutional fold. This man was a bad man. You see? So, this is why we go on to say, Christus. When I say in order to form a more perfect union, right? To ensure domestic tranquility. So I mean, Christus intestinas tranquillas aminas. Learn your language, Moors. Learn it. And the reason why I say that is because now he'll even make attempts to try to, you know, argue with you and talk to you about law, procedure, this, that, and the other, but if it ain't constitutional, I ain't hearing it. All right, that's number one. Number two, well, where they always talk about, well, do you need an interpreter? Well, if you can find someone who's qualified to interpret my language, which there's only one individual who claims that the language is a dead language, well, if it is a dead language and by his order or so-called decree or belief or whatever the case is, or false belief, well, why are you speaking it, namely the Pope? Why? Why aren't there any interpreters in the United Nations who speak Latin? They speak everything else. Why? Because there is no Latin nation. Save for the one Moorish nation. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. So, I go on to say, paronam, plebeius excusatio. So, when I say to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, to promote the general welfare, augio imperitor prosperitas. All right. Then I'm going to talk about something, the next line, which is very important, right? Which is to promote the general welfare, to, what's the next line? For those of you that have your Constitution handy. It's important to know your Constitution. your foremothers and forefathers, right, established it, ordained and established it. So you should know it. But, more importantly, securas, benedicto, securas, benedicto, right, which is to secure the blessings of what? Licentia, liberties. Notice when I say licentia, I mean what? License. I don't mean a license given to you by Congress or the state or whomever. I'm talking about a liberty of which cannot be taken away, cannot be abrogated, cannot be, anything cannot be done to it unless you, of course, give it up yourselves. So we're talking about divine, unalienable, and national rights. And because these rights have been desecrated by a settler, right? Or what is it referred to as peregrinus, which is alien or foreign. Okay? But have been desecrated by a foreigner. Well, hey, look, it's time to do something. Right? This is a, because you know you really can't beat them, you know, with power, because power is only what? An illusion, and will pass away. That's right. But force changes not. Why do you think Obi-Wan Kenobi said, Luke, use the force? Right? So when he's saying Luke or look, he's only saying be aware, be conscious of the force. Work within the force, use the force, and it will protect you. That force being Allah. Islam. Right? That's why we say, Allah is my protector, my guide, and my salvation by night and by day through his holy prophet, Drew Ali. Amen. All right? So that's why this is so important. That's why we must bring the divine and the supreme together. That's why the prophet said, these are your divine instructions and your divine law, and your supreme law will be handed to you later. When you came into consciousness, when you came into understanding of constitutional law, when you came into understanding of at-law procedures. Okay? So as far as I'm concerned, there is no, what is this, the abolition of the distinctions between at-law actions and suits and equity, as they said in 1938 when they came up with this Erie Railroad versus Tompkins to suit their own purposes. No. There is no distinction between, or abolition of distinction between civil actions and suits and admiralty. Because constitutionally, there's nothing wrong with admiralty, but when it's colorable, there is something wrong with it. Right? Because we're only talking about international contracts or contracts between nations. But I cannot have you implicate me or include me or presume to include me in a contract or a treaty or whatever with another nation that has nothing to do with me and a contract or agreement of which I was not a part of and was not present, and therefore that only means that it could only be fraud. All right? Islam. So I'm going to get ready to close, but I just want to add a few other things because this stuff is really, really important. Really important. Yes. So, you know, these are just some things, as I said, that I wanted to mention about the so-called bankruptcy, about the law, about Latin, your language, and about learning what it is and how to use it and how to enforce it. And you have to enforce it when those who were bound to uphold that law are not doing their job. All right? I mean, just to give you an example, I had a situation recently on 34th Street I mean, just as something as simple as catching a cab. It was cold, maybe back in October or something like that. And, you know, I was standing in front of the Pennsylvania Hotel on 34th Street in Manhattan, New York. And, you know, so I'm crossing the street to catch a cab because you can't catch a cab in front of Madison Square Garden because they're doing construction or whatever they were doing. So I'm standing in front of the hotel to catch a cab, and this guy comes out and says, "You can't stand in front of the hotel to catch a cab." Who are you? What you talking about? What are you talking about? I don't know you. I mean, what gives you an authority or a right to tell me that I can't stand here on my land to do anything, you know, that's lawful? So, but at any rate, he goes on to tell me, you know, why I can't do this, that, and the other, and if I don't move, he's going to call the police because there are other people standing here on line waiting for him or the next bellboy or whomever to catch a cab. And I'm like, listen, you know what? As a matter of fact, I will go to the corner right there where two officers are standing and have them come over, and I will tell them what the problem is and how you are trying to obstruct the divine right of the people. You know, now, I wasn't really trying to make a big case out of this or whatever, because it really wasn't a big thing. However, when the officers came over, they're telling me, well, you know, he's right. You can't be standing in front of the hotel because blah, 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 and hotel policy. Well, wait a minute. If I'm not concerned with federal public policy and international policy, then I'm definitely not concerned with a hotel policy. Right? So I told the officers, I said, listen, I'm the people of the United States, a United States citizen, and the Minister of Legal Affairs of the United States for the United States Citizens Council. So now, who are you who have a constitutional oath to uphold, protect, and defend the people's law to tell me what to do, how to do it, and when to do it? So I said, well, and I have a legal document to that effect of who I am. I presented the documentation, my ID or whatever. They looked at it, oh, are you a diplomat? I said, no. I said, my immunity extends far beyond any diplomat. I'm not here as a foreigner doing business with the federal corporate bankrupt United States or any of its de facto agencies and those who are functioning under the corporate criminal bankruptcy of the international bankers. So he passes it to his partner, and they look at it, and they pass it back to me, and 2 seconds later, they're hailing a cab for me, opening the door like Joe Butler. All right? This is what I'm talking about, just on a small level, a minute level, when you enforce the law. Islam. You see? So, I mean, I had a court case recently, a housing court case, when I went on behalf of my parents, of an individual who was trying to evict my parents. Now, I figured, you know, I wasn't really going to go there to start no trouble or whatever. But when they came with this fiction of law, speaking like this mannequin lawyer, telling me that, well, you got to do this, that, and the other, and the blah, 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 and the individual wants to raise the rent $400 for your parents, I said, no, I can't do that. But then I said, well, you know what? Where's the agreement? Where's the contract? I'll sign it. But when I signed it, I used the remedy. CFC, TDC, whatever, compulsion, force, and conquest, plunder, bankruptcy, and conquest, all right? And you know what? When we went in to see the magistrate, she said, I'm not going to sign off on this. Why? But first, even before she said that, she said, have both parties read the agreement? And I said, well, no. But you mean to tell me you're not going to read a contract that you signed? Well, I said I didn't need to because it's unlawful, it's fraudulent, it's unconstitutional, and it is in criminal conformity with the said procedure of this court, which is colorable and unconstitutional at best. I even went into some things about the Admiralty flag, this, that, and the other, and told them where they can find it as proof of the them functioning under the Admiralty procedure of law. But, to make a long story short, I then went on to ask her, well, did you not take a constitutional oath to uphold this Constitution, wherein the people have questions about how you are functioning, right, as a constitutional servant out vying for the people. And she said, well, I'm not on trial. Yes, you are. You're always on trial. Wherein the people have a question about, again, your constitutionality or lack thereof. There are always questions. You're always on trial. We're always watching you. And my Father's eye is watching you. All right? So, you know, you can have the seal and all of this on your money. And yes, we know that the money is unlawful, it's illegal, this and that, but guess what? The simple fact that they got that seal on the $1 bill legalizes that $1 bill. Believe it or not. However, my interest is in establishing or reestablishing the supreme law of the land and the laws of the continental United States for the people of the continental United States, Moorish people and the Moorish government of the United States, and establishing the, again, the only pecuniary medium of exchange, namely gold and silver. So where is it? When are you going to get it? And how soon? Because I have evidence, I have proof of the fact that you have misappropriated. I have evidence of the fact that you sold, you've converted over $27 billion in gold at a time, and at one time $900 billion in gold, of which again can be found in Louis T. McFadden's articles of impeachment, May 23rd, 1933, as I said earlier, all right? And how it was sold to the Bank of England and on and on and on. But again, like I said, you must enforce the law, all right? Keep the law, uphold the law, and enforce the law, all right? So with those words, I'm going to say, Islam, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, and I hope to see you brothers, or I envision rather, don't hope, I envision to see you brothers and sisters again in the very near future. Thank you. Islam.
Yes, I'm healthy in the now. I'm wealthy in the now. No TV in the now. Don't need no money in the now. It's just me in the now. Just me in the now. Just me in the now. It's just me in the now. shipping out and win tomorrow. Read now backwards and spell one, then twist it up and you spell on. Take ownership and out and win tomorrow. Ownership and out and win tomorrow. Ooh, 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 ooh. I came back here to sing for you. Let this music get into you. So many lessons in the now. No stressing in the now. I'm protected in the now. Protected in the now. I'm living in the now. Cause tomorrow is now. Tomorrow is now. Yes, tomorrow is now, now. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. I love you. Close your eyes and visualize everything that ain't there. Breathe in. Now breathe out. Let the positivity in. Feel the negativity flow out. I'm out.
Yeah. When I sit back and think about it, it's like, man, I ain't even supposed to be here. I almost died, had a near-death experience, which turned out to be a pro-life experience. And I came out the hospital and I made this album. The room number I was in, 13. So I know that it's a real reason for me to be here, to see what I seen and to come back. It don't happen every day. You see, the world is it's like a big movie, you know? You know, I look at it like we all just characters playing a part, that's all, to something greater. Cause you know, really, we all just here to remind each other, to guide each other. And I just want y'all to feel me like I feel you. Peace.